See, the title of my presentation is to treat or not to treat the position of Ayurveda. Now, I'm aware that the topic of this project that the department has undertaken is ethical issues in the clinical disputes pertaining to the terminally ill. So before I begin with my presentation, I want to give a couple of preliminary remarks. The first thing that I want to clarify is that we are talking about the disputes in a typical clinical context. Now this clinical context and the disputes that arise in this clinical context, the issues are of a very recent origin. So like we've already discussed in the morning, due to the advancement in technology, we have been able to have more life-sustaining apparatus, and we have been able to probably prolong life for what is more than what we could even imagine a few years ago. So this is a very recent development, and it's a development particularly of the modern and the ultra-modern times. So when we are talking about, when we are expecting a perspective on these ethical issues in the clinical disputes pertaining to the terminally ill, and when we are expecting a perspective from a discipline like Ayurveda, we need to remember when I am talking about it and when you are listening to it, we all need to bear in mind that we are talking about something that is at least, if not more, 2000 years apart from where we stand today. Okay? So we shouldn't expect a direct straightforward answer. We should definitely expect certain insights that will give us some guidelines in order to look at these issues in different manner, particularly in India, because it's a very original tradition that we have here, which will cater to the needs of our culture. So it's very much ours, and so we can definitely expect answers, if not direct answers, at least perspectives to resolve certain issues that we face today. Having said that, it's a discipline that is 2000 years apart from us. I in no way mean to undermine the potentiality of that discipline. However, I just want all of us to remember this, that we have to place all that I'm going to present now in the context of what happened or what used to be the situation 2000 years ago. The second comment that I want to make, as is visible, is that I'm going to make a slight digression from the topic of research, and I take that liberty because Harish had told me particularly that though the topic of the project is something in particular, you may talk about something peripheral or something relating to the subject. So it's not completely unrelated to the subject because my topic says to treat or not to treat. So it's definitely regarding the terminally ill patients. But it's a different approach that I'm going to take. The third disclaimer, or the third, not a disclaimer, but the third point that I want to make is that when I say that I'm talking about the position of Ayurveda, I am not talking about the position of Ayurveda in general, but the position of Ayurveda as reflected through one of the major texts of Ayurveda, which is Charaka Samhita, in which I happen to have done my research. So Charaka Samhita is one of the three major texts of Ayurveda. The other two being Sushruta Samhita and Ashtanga Hridaya. My readings have been primarily of the Charaka Samhita, so I will concentrate on the Charaka Samhita. So I will begin my presentation now. The two primary objectives of Ayurveda, those who have listened to my presentations at least a couple of times before know that there are two primary objectives of Ayurveda. The preventive approach that Ayurveda takes, where it talks about swasthasya swastha rakshana, so to maintain the health of the healthy, and the second one being curative, which is aturasya vikara prashamanam, so to alleviate the disorders or to cure those who are ailing. This is the twofold objective of Ayurveda. Now, in the context of the preventive approach, we get to know about the preventive approach of Ayurveda through several general principles that these treatises of Ayurveda talk about. These principles are within the text of Ayurveda divided into three broad categories. The first category is of the Sadvrutta, which as you can see is the regimen for good life. So if you want to lead a good life, what sort of regimen, what sort of conduct in general, ahar vihar particularly, should you have? The Dinacharya particularly talks about how should your daily regimen be like, and the Ritucharya talks about the discipline of seasonal regimen. Now remember, this is in the context of the preventive approach. So this is when the objective is to prevent yourself from having any disease or to prevent any kind of disorders. So this is the preventive approach. I am not going to go into the details of it because our focus is going to be the curative approach. So the curative approach of Ayurveda, the objective being treating the ailment, treating the patient, revolves around these 4 factors of treatment that Ayurveda calls the 4 limbs of treatment, or the Chatushpada of Chikitsa. So Chikitsa is broadly therapeutics or treatment, and Ayurveda calls this the Chatushpada of Chikitsa. So these 4 factors of treatment are firstly, please remember these because it's a circle that's revolving around, there's no particular order as to which comes first. So there's the physician, there are medicines, there's patient, and of course there's the nursing staff. So the whole of the therapeutics that is mentioned in the Ayurveda from the curative perspective revolves around these 4 pillars, and there are long discussions as to what the nature of each of these factors should be like, what are the essential qualities of each of these factors, and how would these qualities make the process of treatment a successful process that ends in that finally ends in attaining the objective, that is the healing of the disorders. So the qualities that I mentioned before, each of the 4 pillars of treatment, each of the 4 factors is in a nutshell supposed to have 4 characteristics or 4 qualities which are essential. Okay, there are several other characteristics which are mentioned throughout the text. There are long passages, unending passages, particularly for the qualities of the physician. But if you have to put all of them together in a nutshell, this would be a picture. So you can say that there are 16 characteristics or 16 qualities of therapeutics which leads to successful treatment. Now in these 16, I want us to particularly concentrate on the characteristics of the physician and that of the patient, because in the clinical setup, these are the 2 factors on which we are going to concentrate. So for the physician, you can see that there is a clear vision in theory, extensive practical experience, so there is theory and practice, a combination of both of them. Apart from theory and practice, there is skill, and the 4th one is purity and cleanliness. As far as the qualities of a patient are concerned, there is in the whole system of Ayurveda, there is very little role that the patient has to actually actively play apart from obeying the instructions of the physician. So as far as the patient is concerned, the desirable or the essential characteristics rather would be memory, obedience to instructions, courage in facing the disease, and ability to describe a disease properly. So if the patient is unable to describe what exactly he is going through, it is impossible that any physician would be able to cure or understand what he is undergoing. So the process of therapeutics is a successful implementation of these 4 factors coming together, having these 16 qualities. Ayurveda goes to the extent of saying that if these 16 qualities are present amongst these 4 factors, no treatment can be a failure. If there's an asterisk there with the conditions apply, that if the ailment is a curable ailment, if it's a curable disease, no curable disease can not be treated if the 4 factors of treatment have all these 16 essential qualities. So how do we classify the diseases? Charaka and Sushruta both classify diseases broadly into either curable or incurable. The curable ones are further classified into easily curable and curable with difficulty. So curable are known as the sadhya ones, easily curable are sukha sadhya, or those which are easily curable, sahaja sadhya. Curable with difficulty are those which are definitely curable, but it would take a longer time and more amount of efforts on behalf of both the physician, the nursing staff and the patient, but they are curable. So they are still classified as curable. Under incurable is again further classified into those that are palliable and those that are absolutely incurable. So in the palliable diseases, they would say that these palliable diseases are those which definitely cannot be cured in the way in which these curable diseases can be cured. But you can, like we discussed since the morning, you can at least make sure that the patient is at most comfortable with whatever his given condition is. So they would talk about palliable diseases. They have also mentioned in the text, they also talk about the nature of these diseases being like there has to be the regimen that we spoke about, the daily and the seasonal regimen. The regimen has to be strictly followed. So there has to be strict adherence to the directives of the physician in case of palliable diseases, because even one slight deviation from the rules and regulations that one is supposed to follow, the palliable disease can become a terminal illness, okay, or can go into the category of absolutely incurable disease. The last one, which is absolutely incurable, is where probably our terminal illnesses that we are talking about today will fall. So, why do the Ayurvedic doctors call these absolutely incurable? They don't actually use the word absolutely, but they call them asadhya. Palliable are known as yapya. So, yapana is something that you can call that which requires life support systems. So, palliable are those which have some minimal life support systems. However, asadhya are the ones that are absolutely incurable. Now it is these absolutely incurable diseases that we are concerned with, and what exactly is the stand of the Ayurvedic doctors on the absolutely incurable diseases is what we are interested to know. The answer we would get from the next slide, where Charaka talks about 4 kinds of attitudes that a physician ought to possess. Now these attitudes are definitely pertaining to the patient, so it's in a clinical setup that we are talking about. The first kind of attitude is friendship towards all beings. Now here it's not human beings, but friendship towards all beings in general. Compassion for the ailing, arteshu karunyam. So those who are ailing, the doctor should essentially have compassion for all those who are ailing. And shakya priti, shakya, for the ones where the cure is possible, for the ones where treatment is possible, the doctor has to have intense or complete devotion towards those kinds of patients, and indifference towards those moving to the end. So, upekshanam prakrutisteshu, prakrutistha. The ones who are prakrutistha, now this is a complicated term, prakrutistha. Prakriti, as we know, not in the context of Sankhya, but in the context of medicine. Prakriti is your general constitution, right? And Prakriti also in the Sankhya sense means the material principle out there. So Prakriti is those who are moving towards becoming one with where they originated from, which is the material principle. So those patients, regarding those patients, an Ayurvedic physician is advised to have indifference. Okay? You can see that the 4 kinds of attitudes that are represented here. Now there is a small pathaved in different kinds of texts, where the first 2 are usually coupled together and said that a doctor should have both friendship and compassion towards the artha, or towards the ailing. Whichever way you take it, the first 3 are definitely not problematic at all. But the last one seems to be problematic, because here it is argued that those who are moving towards the end, those who are terminally ill in today's context, the doctor should have an indifferent attitude. Now there are a lot of ways in which this indifference can be interpreted, and there are a lot of problems that this indifference might create in today's context. But my argument is that I want to justify this indifference. So what is the position? Like I have just said, the position of the Ayurveda is that a patient suffering from an absolutely incurable disease, the ones we classified as the last kind, the asadhya ones, which is terminal and non-palliable in every sense, that patient should be abandoned by the physician. Okay? Now when I say abandoned by the physician, I am purposely giving the Sanskrit term there. It is said tam parivarjaya. Okay, so he should be abandoned. This concept of abandoning the patient with a terminal illness or this advice of abandoning has occurred in one of the chapters, which is the Indriya Sthana of the Charaka Samhita. In only one chapter it has appeared 19 times, 19, that the physician is advised to abandon the patient who is suffering from terminal illness. That's alone in Indriya Sthana. Elsewhere there are several times where repeatedly this advice appears for the physician. So this is the position. The reasons given for this position, of course Ayurveda has not stopped by taking a position but tried to justify its position by giving different reasons, and these reasons can be classified into two main categories. The first category is of futility of treatment. Why should the patient be abandoned? Because the treatment is futile, because the treatment is not giving any results. And the second category of the reasons that are given relate to the consequences of the failed treatment. So what are the consequences that the physician will have to face for the failed treatment? It's the loss of wealth, because probably if a patient dies at the hands of the physician, there won't be many more patients further coming to the physician. So it will be loss of the futuristic wealth. The loss of knowledge, which seems to be problematic as to how will the edifice of knowledge suffer any loss because of one patient dying, and the loss of reputation for the physician. These are the two different categories of reasons that Ayurveda talks about. Now I present my argument. This is an essential background for us to understand what my argument is first of all. Like Dr. Iyer was rightly referring to, whenever you take an ethical position is never free of any metaphysical and epistemological presuppositions. So we know that in case of the Charvakas, for example, their ethical position is determined directly, or it's a direct logical consequence of their epistemological and metaphysical position. So this argument that the ancient doctors are putting forth in front of us, this position definitely has to have some metaphysical and epistemological background, and we need to understand that background. The second and the most important point is that Ayurveda texts are not essentially philosophical. Okay, though today we are into an exercise of deriving some philosophical insights from them, their objective ultimately is not philosophical. So you cannot say that the doctors are philosophers, the doctors are metaphysicians. They are not. We can derive particular philosophical positions, we can derive ethical, metaphysical and epistemological positions, but that's not the primary objective of the treatise. Now whatever I am going to say henceforth is derived from the book Science and Society in Ancient India by Professor Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay, who is also the author of Lokayata, the famous text Lokayata. So I have built my argument on the basis of what I have come across in that book Science and Society in Ancient India, where Professor Chattopadhyay argues that the ancient Indian doctors were quote-unquote science conscious. So we have to remember, like I said, that the Ayurvedic physicians were not philosophers, they were scientists, right? They were interested in the science of medicine as such. So they were science conscious is what his basic argument is, and how they were science conscious is what I am going to try and present. So if you look at the first point, it is said that Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay argues that these doctors were basically materialists. Okay, now our understanding of the word materialism, we tend to, in the Indian context, we tend to equate it with the Charvakas. Okay. However, as far as materialism is concerned, I want all of us to understand materialism in the ontological sense here, where we talk about the primacy of matter. We are not denying the existence of consciousness, but we are understanding that the matter is also, if not any lesser, but as important as consciousness is. And so, ontologically speaking, not just ontologically, but in every sense, I would argue that the ancient Indian doctors were materialists. Now, why were they materialists? Because they were interested in the interaction that happened within the matter that existed out there and the matter that exists in here. So the interaction between the bodily matter and the environmental matter. the food that we consume, the environment that we live in, the elements that basically our bodies are made up of, is all matter. There exists nothing, according to the medical perspective, medicine would not be interested in anything that is not matter. Do you think, does anyone here think that one is justified to hold that the science of medicine would be interested in something that is not material? From a typical scientific perspective, you would only be interested if, as the science of medicine, the practitioners would be interested in something that is material, something that is tangible, something that is capable of being transformed into something else, right? There is this continuous transformation of matter that is happening in the environment. There is also transformation of matter that is happening in our bodies. So it's the matter and its transformation that they are primarily concerned with, and that is why I think Professor Chattopadhyay is justified in holding that the ancient doctors, Indian doctors, were materialists. Now there are a couple of shlokas, not shlokas particularly, but a couple of sutras, the translation of which I want to quote to just to give you a glimpse of how this materialism of the ancient doctors comes forth. So, yes. So one of the contentions that Professor Chattopadhyay has, he says that this constant interaction between the environmental matter and the matter of the body is depicted by the physicians through different instances where they relate the man or the Purusha not essentially with the consciousness that the Purusha has, but essentially with the matter of which the Purusha is made. So in one place Charaka says that Sharira Mulaha cha Purushaha Bhavati. Okay? So everything about the Purusha, according to Charaka, is established in the body. Even if it's consciousness, it is still established in the body. As physicians, as doctors, they wouldn't be considering, they wouldn't be interested in consciousness that is outside the body. So everything about the Purusha, everything about man, their subject matter particularly, is concentrated in the body, is concentrated in the material aspect, tangible aspect of the body. Also, another instance, Sarvam Dravyam Panchabhautikam. This is very simple Sanskrit to understand, though this is directly from the ancient text. Sarvam Dravyam Panchabhautikam. So all matter that exists is a combination of Panchabhautikam, the five Mahabhutas, Asmin Arthe. So in this discipline, whatever dravya, whatever matter we are concerned with is a combination of the five basic elements. Tat Chetanavat or Chetanavat cha. So whether something is endowed with consciousness or whether something is not endowed with consciousness, we cannot forget the fact that it is made up of matter. Again, please remember we are talking about something that happened 2000 years ago. Okay? So there are several such instances that we would come across as far as the materialist view of the doctors is concerned. I want all of us to bear in mind these pointers because in the end I am going to connect all this to something very different, something that we were also discussing yesterday. Another thing that represents the science consciousness of the doctors according to Chattopadhyay is the empirical knowledge that for them is the ultimate foundation of their science. So what do we mean by empirical knowledge? How do the doctors attain their knowledge as far as their diagnosis is concerned? I'm going to come to that. But the knowledge that the doctors rely upon for their diagnosis or the knowledge that the doctors rely upon for the course of the treatment that has to be decided is all empirical knowledge. Almost all empirical knowledge, and I can't completely say it's purely empirical, but there is an enormous amount of empirical data that they use, and on that empirical data they derive their theoretical generalizations, which is the general inductive method that we talk about today, the scientific method. So on that empirical, on the basis of that empirical data, the theoretical generalizations are built, and throughout the text of Charaka Samhita, you will find several such examples, long passages quoted of the different amount of empirical data that was gathered by the doctors of those times. Another example that I want to quote this time from the Sushruta Samhita, where Sushruta says that a learned physician must never try to examine on grounds of pure logic the efficacy of a medicine. It would be only foolish to to talk about the efficacy of a medicine based on purely logical grounds. Why? Because it's a matter of practice. You have to first see what exactly are the results of that medicine. So a learned physician must never try to examine on grounds of pure logic the efficacy of a medicine, which is known by direct observation. You can know the efficacy of a medicine by direct observation, so why rely on completely logical grounds? Thus, for example, even 1,000 logical grounds will never make the Ambashta, which is a group of drugs, have a purgative function. Now, Ambashta is a group of drugs which is used to cure dysentery. So, on logical grounds, how much ever you try to argue, that medicine is not going to perform a purgative function. So, there is no point in relying purely on logic. You have to come back to your empirical ground and the data that you gather from your observations. As far as the diagnosis is concerned, they talk about 3 modes of ascertaining the particular nature of a disease. Now, there are several names of different diseases quoted throughout the text of Charaka Samhita. And finally, Charaka also says that it's impossible for me to give an exhaustive list of all diseases. Why? Because during those times again, the diseases were classified on the basis of different, the root where the diseases originated, the particular dosha within Vata, Pitta and Kapha which is vitiated, which is the cause of the disease and so on and so forth. So, it is practically impossible, he says, to give a list of all the diseases. Okay, because they may differ in their constitution, in their symptoms, in their prognosis. So, how does one ascertain the nature of a disease? Here you can see that there are 3 sources of knowledge, what we would call the sources of knowledge today. The first one, and please remember this time it has a chronological order. So they say that it has to begin with Aptopadesh. How do we gather knowledge? How do we get knowledge? So when somebody is getting trained to be a physician, he definitely has to rely on Aptopadesh, whether it is in the textual form or whether it is in the form of the teacher's teaching. So that's the first source. The second source is perception. The third one is inference. Now in this, an interesting point is that it is said that the diagnosis of a disease is faultless. I am quoting from the Charaka Samhita again. The diagnosis of a disease is faultless only after the disease has been fully examined in all its aspects with the help of these 3 ways of knowing. So, you can arrive at a perfect diagnosis only if it is arrived at using these 3 ways of knowing. Relying purely on one way of knowing is not an accurate diagnosis according to them. So, the starting point is the knowledge gained from Aptopadesh, and perception and inference, it is said, is the next step which helps you critically examine the Aptopadesh. So they are not stopping by saying that Aptopadesh is a full stop and then you move on to perception and inference. Perception and inference will help you critically examine not just the patient and whatever you to diagnose, but also the Aptopadesh. Now, there are certain fundamental postulates of Ayurveda that Professor Chattopadhyay has come up with, and I was absolutely amazed by this analysis of Professor Chattopadhyay. Everything in nature, he says, now please remember this is, I have presented this in a very rudimentary form, but he has built elaborate arguments to come to this point. So he says that according to the science of Ayurveda, everything in nature takes place according to laws inherent in nature. So they believe in the laws of nature, particularly the uniformity of nature and the principle of causation, which we talk about being the formal grounds of induction today. Though immutable, these laws are nevertheless knowable. Okay, so they talk about the understanding that the laws are immutable. You cannot intervene and change the course of nature. The laws are immutable, but that doesn't stop you from knowing the laws. And the knowledge of these laws brings power over nature to a certain extent, which medically speaking means ensuring long life, which medically speaking means some sort of interference, some sort of intervention, not to change the course of nature, but an intervention which is an intervention of a kind where you know what the cause-effect relationship is between a particular disease and the causes of the disease, or what would be the symptoms of a particular disease, or what would be the effects of a particular medicine. So on those lines, Chattopadhyay talks about these three fundamental postulates of Ayurveda, and he also happens to connect them with the three important theories that we have in general in Indian philosophy. One being the theory of karma, which Chattopadhyay calls supernaturalism. The other extreme being Yadruchhavada or accidentalism, and the third one being Swabhavavada. And he says that the Ayurvedic doctors seem to adhere to or seem to subscribe to the theory of Swabhavavada, because it is Swabhavavada which tells us that the world is not merely a chaos, and whatever order exists in the world is not merely an accident like Yadruchhavadins would tell us. However, they would also not accept the theory of karma, which in a way brings some kind of determinants, which makes it very deterministic and leaving zero room for any kind of intervention for us to change the course of nature when it comes to treating diseases. So now that I have made a reference to karma, like I have mentioned in one of my presentations before, Professor Chattopadhyay says that the inclusion of these terms such as the theory of karma, the nature of soul, the concept of moksha, the concept of rebirth, all these, the inclusion of all these concepts, he says, on the part of the physicians, is a kind of a ransom that the physicians have paid to the then lawgivers so that their science sustains. As simple as that. Okay, so he says that all this, the real science of medicine in India is all under this intellectual debris that you would find. And this particular concept of intellectual debris and understanding that this is a ransom that they sort of paid to the lawgivers was something that, my belief in this idea was rejuvenated, so to say, after yesterday's talk, when we could see that some other system also in the Indian context have undergone the same fate, particularly the Lokayatikas and the Arthashastra that we spoke about yesterday. The last but not the least important point is the ideal of humanism that is depicted throughout the text of Charak Samhita, where this humanism comes in, particularly in the context of the characteristics of the physician. And again, I want to quote just a couple of verses from the Charak Samhita, where Charaka says that among the physician, he surpasses all who practices medicine neither for the sake of money nor for the sake of sensual gratification in any other form, but is motivated only by the compassion for living beings. So this, if you remember, originally we started with the problem of abandoning a patient who is terminally ill. This humanistic approach makes it less problematic. So he says that the physician has to be essentially motivated only by compassion for all living beings. Also, he says that those who, as a source of income, want to sell medical skill as any other commodity appear to run after a heap of dust overlooking the real hoard of gold. So the real hoard of gold probably lies in the satisfaction that one gets after having helped somebody come out of his ailments, alleviate the disorders. So merchandization of the skill, merchandization of this whole profession is something that was definitely a big no-no, which he calls Chikitsa Panya Vikraya. A wise physician, according to Charaka, is regarded as Pranabhisara. Abhisara means going behind, or somebody who actually chases life of the physician, chases not in the sense of chasing out life from the patient, but somebody who brings back life into the patient, or somebody who is the savior of life. So it's a noble profession that leads to the highest form of happiness, according to Charaka. And I conclude. So I think that as far as the Charak Samhita or the Ayurvedic position is concerned, there is no real dilemma of whether to treat or not treat as far as the incurable diseases, the last category, is concerned. All this, the diagnosis, if you see, or once the person is ready to be a physician, it presupposes a rigorous training in order to become a doctor, and there is a thorough knowledge of the discipline, both derived from empirical basis as well as on rational basis. Also, In a very scientific spirit, the Ayurvedic doctors are aware of the limits of their therapeutic technique and they nowhere want to pretend to cure incurable diseases. That's all. I've just initiated my study into this area of Ayurveda right now. So this is again a very naive approach to it, but I think it does give us some insights on how Ayurveda would look.